Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to part 2 of episode 4. Now, in the last episode, we've seen some fumbles and touchdowns as far as the police investigation is concerned. They fumbled when the first responders didn't have crime scene tape with them, and when they allowed too many and unnecessary police officers to traipse through the crime scene, and in the process compromising any shoeprint evidence that the perpetrator may have left behind. Now, I'm in no way condoning this type of behavior, but to be fair, problems with how first responders behave in and manage crime scenes, and even trained crime scene investigators, are not uncommon. You just have to look at some high-profile cases such as the Amanda Knox case and O.J. Simpson cases to see what happened there and the problems that they experienced with crime scene management. Now, the touchdown started to happen as soon as Bartholomew arrived. Bystanders were chased away, the fingerprinting was postponed to more favorable light conditions, he used advanced technology to look for shoe prints, he called Koch, who I believe played a beautiful game, judging by the meticulous way he recorded the evidence he found at the crime scene. Photos and notes, and just the way that he did his investigation, I think, was very, very well done and very professional. Now, before I continue, I just want to address some questions that came up in social media since the previous video. Firstly, about the remotes. There were two remotes on the couch, a grey Samsung remote for the DVD player and a black JVC remote for the television that got wedged between Inge and the back of the couch. This was the remote that Christo Pretorius thought was a knife or scissors with which Inge committed suicide. Now, in this photo you can also see the remnants of the black fingerprinting powder on the remote. Now, secondly, about the position of the perpetrator during the attack. Now, according to Koch, this general area don't have any blood spatter and it's likely a shadow area caused by a person standing there during the attack. Thomas and I looked at this and we agree with this assessment. So now let's get back into part 2. So after he and Koch left the apartment at about 4 AM, Bartholomew quickly returned home, and then thereafter he went to the morgue where Inge's body was kept. He wanted to use a process called fuming to look for fingerprints on Inge's body. Now, fuming is a process whereby the body is placed in an airtight bag, and this bag is then filled with fumes of a type of glue that reacts with areas of the skin where there may be fingerprints. So at the time, fuming was a fairly new process internationally as well as in South Africa, and unfortunately no fingerprints could be identified. So after his business at the morgue, Bartholomew returned to the flat at about 10 AM to meet up with the fingerprint team. They needed him to open the flat for them, because remember, Bartholomew kept the keys with him when they locked up earlier that morning. The team consisted of the lifter, Constable Swartz, and the two dusters, Inspector Marian Boysens and Inspector Heini Kutsia. Now, it just so worked out this particular week it was Constable Swartz's turn to do the lifting. They normally go on a weekly rotation. So here's a photo of my brother, Thomas, and Constable Swartz. My brother had extensive interviews with him, where Swartz answered a lot of questions and also did some demonstrations of how he lifted Volume 1 to Thomas. And Thomas has a very high opinion of Constable Swartz as a person. Very down-to-earth man that just wanted to work and provide for his family. So to do the dusting, the team decided to divide the apartment between them. Kutsia was to dust the balcony door area and the bathroom, and Swartz the front door area and the kitchen, and Boysens the living room area. They were instructed to bring any visible fingerprints to the attention of Bartholomew. Now, there are two types of powders that are used in the dusting process. You get aluminum powder, which is a silvery color, and black powder. Now, aluminum powder are basically used on smooth surfaces such as glass or plastic. And on other surfaces, the type of powder that you would use would depend on what would give you the best contrast. For example, if you're on a dark surface, you would use the silvery aluminum powder. If you're on a light surface or a white surface, you would use the black powder. So these photos were taken by a private investigator on April the 1st. And here one can still see the remnants of the black powder on the front door and on some of the kitchen drawers. There are also two ways of lifting prints, with Folien and Scotch tape. Now, Folien is basically a sticky black rubber sheet with a plastic cover. And before lifting, you take off this cover, and after you've lifted the print, you put the cover back on in order to protect the print. Now, Folien is used to lift light-colored aluminum powders, lifts prints, and Scotch tape is used to lift black powder prints. Now, Inspector Boysen started her work at the coffee table where she saw several loose articles. So on the table, she dusted 3 objects that appears to have been recent additions to the table. A DVD disc, a DVD holder, and a tall drinking glass. She saw viable fingerprints on the DVD holder as well as on a drinking glass, and she brought these to attention of Swartz and Bartholomew. So on this table here, this is the coffee table, we can see the DVD holder and an empty but used drinking glass with a straw. Now, as I previously mentioned, according to Inge's mother, Inge always drank with a straw, without exception. And also remember that the DVD disc was removed by Neville de Beer after the video was taken, after the crime scene video was taken by Desmond Scher. And it seems like he just placed the DVD disc down on the coffee table. So this is how Folien 1 came about. Swartz first took a lift from the bottom front of the DVD holder. And after inspecting this lift, he came to the conclusion that it was a dud. The prints were not good and not identifiable, so he threw it away. Then he used another piece of Folien and took a lift over the top half of the DVD holder where the really good fingerprints were. And then after that, he used another Folien to lift the prints from the drinking glass. Inspector Boysen proceeded to dust the rest of the living room, including the television and the area around it. And thereafter she assisted Coetzee to dust the balcony door. Now altogether, Constable Swartz took 11 lifts, 2 of Folien and 9 of Scotch tape. So in addition to the DVD cover and the tall drinking glass, there was 1 print from the bathroom wash basin, 1 from the security phone in the kitchen. There were 3 from the front door security gate and 4 from the balcony door security gate. So here we can see the front and the back of Folien 1. And here we have the front and back of Folien 2. And here is lift number 4, the print that was found on the security phone. And here we have lift number 5, one of the prints that was found on the front security gate. As a standard procedure, the fingerprint lifter is required to complete a crime scene report as he and she works. After every lift, the number, the type of lift, whether it was tape or Folien, the location, a description of the object or the surface from which the print was lifted, and other relevant details must be recorded on a crime scene report. In this case, the crime scene report was 4 pages long, and it became Exhibit NN during the later court proceedings. Now let's look, for example, at Folien 1. So after Folien 1 was lifted, Swartz sealed the Folien with 2 white stickers. And one of the stickers he wrote the number 1 and then PKRS. At that time, he still didn't have the evidence number, the case number I mean, and that was completed later. Then he made a corresponding entry in the crime scene report. Fingerprint lifted from a DVD disc holder, which was found on the coffee table in the lounge of the flat and showed sideways to the left. He also drew a sketch of the DVD holder and marked on it the position of the fingerprints, much like coroners do when they show the location of wounds on rudimentary body diagrams. Then lastly, he recorded the position of where he found the DVD cover on a floor plan he sketched, and he labeled it FP1. Similarly, also on the same plan, he marked the position of the tall drinking glass with FP2. Now, where Constable Swartz deviated from standard procedure was when he did not copy the details recorded in the crime scene report to the back of each lift right there at the crime scene. He only did this later when he got back to the comfort of his office, a short while later. Now, he didn't consider this to be a problem. It's not a difficult task to copy information from the crime scene report to the back of the lift. He just did it for the sake of comfort and efficiency. It's not always easy to make neat notes and clean notes at the crime scene while wearing gloves that's potentially dirty. And it also adds to the time that you are spending at the crime scene. Now, the court didn't seem to be too overly concerned with this deviation. There weren't many lifts and only 2 made with foliant, so the risk of an error would have been very small. Well, I'm not advocating for the police not to stick to protocol and procedure, but let's keep everything in perspective and not make a mountain out of a molehill, especially in this case where there's no evidence that any of the lifts were mislabeled, especially not foliant 1. Now, the police were nonetheless criticized for not taking photos of the prints after dusting and before they were lifted. Now, in some cases where it's not possible to lift prints with foliant or tape, the visible prints are photographed and then the photos become the evidence that's later analyzed to compare with other prints. According to the police at that time, there was no standard protocol for crime scene investigators to take photos of prints before they lifted with foliant or tape. This particular team didn't do it at this crime scene, they didn't do it at other crime scenes, and by the time of the court case in 2007, they still weren't doing it at any crime scene. Indeed, if they did, I would not be sitting here. There would be no books and there would be no mystery. The police also did not take the DVD holder nor the drinking glass into evidence. And the judge was very critical of the police for not taking the DVD into evidence and returning it to the video place on March the 24th. In my opinion, there was no need to keep the DVD, and there was nothing to prevent the police from returning it. So when you take a lift from an object, the lift becomes the evidence, not your object. In this particular case, the object was well documented through photos of the crime scene video, the notes that Swartz did, the sketches he drew, the numbering he did on the sketch plans. It was well documented. The only thing that seems to be missing is a photo of it with the prints on. But there was also no indication that the DVD or the glass were handled by the murderer. There were no bloody fingerprints found on these objects, nor were the blood spatter found underneath them. And the police cannot take every object they left prints from into evidence. It would require an enormous amount of storage and it would be a logistical nightmare. Keep in mind also that these objects are someone's private property. In this particular crime scene, there were lifts taken only from 2 objects. But what about a crime scene where there could be many, many more objects, 10, 20, 50, 100? Who knows? We can't expect the police to take all these objects into evidence. I want to ask the Honorable Judge Johan van Zyl, who was so critical and suspicious of the police. I want to ask him some questions. I know you will never answer, but I'm going to ask them anyway. If, for example, the police found fingerprints on the television or the DVD player, would you expect the police to bag the television and the DVD player and put it into storage? If so, how long would you recommend the police keep them? A week, a month, a year? Or until the case is solved or the print is identified? And what if that never happens? You may argue that the DVD is smaller than the TV and can easily be put in a drawer somewhere. But then I would ask you, what is the threshold? When is something too big? When is something too small? And isn't it important that the same rules apply to all evidence? So dear judge, I'm asking you again, why should the police have kept the DVD holder when they didn't know whose prints were on it? They're not clairvoyants. Do you expect them to be? And why did you get so uptight about this? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm probably going to make 1 or 2 episodes just about the performance or the lack of performance of this judge. And I'm not going to hold back. And it's not going to be pretty. I have a right to criticize this judge, and the right to criticize judges was confirmed by the Constitutional Court in the case of State versus Mamamambolo in 2001. It's coming. Now, the fingerprint team finished their work at about 12:05. And then Swartz returned to his office, where he arrived at about 1 o'clock. The very first thing he did was to take the lifts to the AFIS office, the Automatic Fingerprint Identification System office, that was in the same building as his, to be scanned and to be run through the system and to be compared with the fingerprints that were in the database. Unfortunately, there were no hits. In other words, none of the prints belonged to anyone who had prints in the AFIS system, which I presume would be people that had a criminal record. Thereafter, Swartz went to his desk, where he completed the back of the list. He copied from the crime scene report to the back of the lifts. Then he placed all of them in an envelope, and he gave it to the supervisor, Matthias, for what they call a 24-hour inspection, where everything gets checked and to make sure there are no mistakes. So while Swartz and the team were busy dusting and lifting prints, Bartholomew called Inspector Desmond Scher to bring some ninhydrin to the flat. Ninhydrin is a chemical liquid that can be applied to porous surfaces such as paper, walls, and tiles, and it reacts with sweat residue to reveal the presence of latent prints. Now, Bartholomew applied ninhydrin to the wall by the entrance and at the wall close to the balcony door. And as it takes time for a reaction to develop, and because there are real toxic fumes present, Bartholomew left, he locked the flat, and to return the next day. Now, the autopsy of Inge took place the next morning at 8:30 after Ian Mayberg did the identification. Now, the autopsy was performed by Dr. Ansi Adendorf. And at the time, Dr. Adendorf was in private practice in the Stellenbosch area, I think, and worked as a district surgeon on a part-time basis. So Bartholomew, Desmond Scher, Koch, and Senior Inspector de Villiers were present. Bartholomew and Scher took photographs of the autopsy and of Inge's body. Bartholomew with a digital camera and Scher with a normal analog camera. Koch was there to retrieve items such as Inge's clothing for further forensic testing. Now, the autopsy report lists the official cause of death as multiple injuries due to blunt and sharp force trauma. Inge was described as 1.64 meters tall and weighing about 60 kilograms. The body was given as normal and nutritional condition as good. She appeared to have been in good health at the time of the attack. Now, please note, I am going to show a photo of some of Inge's head wounds. It will be faded, black and white, and cropped to reduce the visual impact. Nonetheless, if you may find this disturbing and upsetting, please skip over the next part. Now, Adendorf identified 5 wounds, 1A to 1E on the right side of the head, 2 on the forehead, 5A and 5B, and 4 on the left-hand side, 10A to 10D, and 1 right at the back in the crown of the head, wound number 9. Now, wounds 1A, 1B, and 5A are basically circular in shape and surrounded by bruising. And the autopsy report records the sizes of 1A and 1B as 30 millimeters, bruising excluded, and the size of 5A as 20 millimeters long, bruising excluded. It was possibly the shape and the nature of these wounds that prompted Arendorf to suggest that the police search for a hammer as one of the murder weapons. Now, wounds 1C, 1D, 9, and 10D were elongated, linear, and quite obviously could not have been caused by the round striking surface of a hammer. So we're either looking at two different weapons here, or a single weapon with two striking surfaces, the one that produces a linear wound and one that produces a round wound, the circular wound. So a combination of the blows on the right hand side of the head left a large oval 7x8 comminuted, fragmented, depressed skull fracture. And although the blows that made wounds 10B and 10C didn't leave much damage to the skin, they contributed to a large 5x8 centimeter depressed skull fracture on the left hand side of the head. The blows to the forehead, 5A and 5B, left a driven-in depressed fracture showing a perfectly smooth circular edge. Inge also had two lacerations on the left cheek, a nose bridge fracture, and several bruises and grazes. And on the right hand there appear to be some defensive wounds, 4 lacerations about 8 to 20 millimeters long. Now, Inge was stabbed 19 times in the neck and torso with a sharp object, presumably a knife. And the direction of stabbing was downwards from left to right. There was roughly a round gaping wound in the chest, about 10 centimeters in diameter, and it appeared as if the murderer tried to carve a hole by stabbing her repeatedly at that location. Now, several ribs were forced apart up to 6.5 centimeters, and 2 of them were severed. And there were 5 puncture wounds in the underlying lung. Now, Arendorf deduced that Inge's heart must still have been beating while the neck wounds were inflicted, because there was bleeding in the surrounding soft tissue. But no arteries were damaged, and that's also why we don't see any arterial spurting at the crime scene. But in relation to the chest wounds, there were no bleeding, and no blood was found in the chest cavity. So it seems that she was already dead when the damage to the chest was inflicted. Now, Inge's stomach contained partially digested food, her hymen wasn't intact, and there were no visible signs of rape. A sexual assault kit or a rape kit was collected and handed to Inspector de Villiers. So if someone tells you that the rape kit wasn't collected and never analyzed, such a person is a liar. The sexual assault kit was handed to the forensic laboratory on April the 4th, where it was subject to a variety of tests, including DNA testing, but more about that later. Now, something that Dr. Arendorf missed, and which was discovered by my brother Thomas Mollett after a painstaking analysis of the autopsy photos, was a small arrow carved into Inge's stomach, pointing towards the pubic area. Now, it's important to note that it shows a little bit of bleeding, and when the body was found, this area of Inge's stomach was covered with the top she was wearing. So to me, it seems that the shirt was lifted up, and the arrow was carved into Inge's stomach, whilst he was still in condition to produce a minor bleeding. The white substance you see is a remnant from the fuming process that Bartholomew subjected the body to when he looked for fingerprints. Now, Koch collected all of Inge's clothing in evidence, and these were also handed to the forensic laboratory on April the 4th, where they were inspected for hair, semen, and blood. Now, a lot has been said about the brutality of the crime and what it means. A lot of people seem to think that the brutality of the murder is indicative of extreme hatred, anger, pent-up emotions, a spur-of-the-moment outburst, a crime of passion, and that it is not consistent or cannot be consistent with a premeditated crime. That was also the Honorable Judge Dion van Zyle's uninformed opinion. This is what he said. And even if the murder of the deceased was premeditated, one would not have expected such excessive violence. It would rather be compatible with uncontrolled aggression due to intense provocation that was released on the victim on the spur of the moment. For example, if the victim was caught in an act with a third party. Now, what does the judge think Inge did on that couch, minding her own business, watching a DVD, reading a magazine, to so intensely provoke such uncontrolled aggression at the spur of the moment? We know she wasn't in a compromising position with a third person. And if she was caught with a third person, who would have had the most reason to be provoked into such uncontrolled anger? And I will leave you to think about that answer for yourself. Now, for the judge to think that such a violent crime could not have been due to premeditation is absolute nonsense. Now, I will gladly show the judge some crime scene photos from the Breda murders in Stellenbosch and ask if he still thinks that murders with some premeditation cannot be brutal. Not a single forensic psychiatrist, not a single criminologist, not a single psychologist, not a single expert of any kind whatsoever testifies in court that a violent murder cannot be premeditated. So where did the judge get this from? And why did he color outside the lines like this? So after the autopsy, Bartholomew, Koch, and de Villiers returned to the flat, the crime scene. Bartholomew wanted to see if the anhydrone revealed any prints. He found a palm print on the wall and he photographed it. Because Dr. Adendorf mentioned a hammer, they searched through Inge's flat for one, and they found one in a cupboard in the guest bedroom, a claw hammer. So Koch bagged the hammer, and this hammer was later handed to the forensic laboratory, where they tested it for the presence of blood, and there was no indication of blood on the hammer. So before leaving, Bartholomew sprayed the walls with anhydrone again, as he wasn't very satisfied with the quality of the palm print that developed after the first application of the anhydrone. And then at that time, Bartholomew handed the keys over to Inspector de Villiers, who was then, at that time, de Villiers was the detective in charge of the investigation. Now, 5 days later, de Villiers, Bartholomew, and a police photographer returned to the flat to check if the second application of anhydrone revealed any additional prints. No additional prints were revealed, but the quality of the palm print was much improved, so they took a series of photos of it. Now, on April the 1st, the crime scene was handed over to private investigators from George Fivers and Associates. So an investigator conducted a search through the flat and took photographs and collected the following items: an empty steer container and 2 cool drink cans, the white towel from the guest bathroom, a white bath towel from the ensuite bathroom, 4 pairs of female underwear from the laundry basket, a red blouse from the laundry basket, a container with letters that was found in the cupboard of the spare bedroom, the office, and a knife, similar to the knife that went missing. Now, these items were apparently given to the police. Not sure what the police did with it. I'm not personally aware that any of these items were studied by the forensic laboratory. The investigators also obtained Inge's phone records from MTN. Now, the funny thing is that on April the 11th, Fred van der Vyver created an Excel file, Microsoft Excel file, and he typed all Inge's phone records into a spreadsheet. And this was indicative of a working relationship that developed between Professor Lotz's investigators and the van der Vyvers. But more about that later. Now, on April the 4th, the forensic laboratory received a sexual assault kit and the items collected at the flat by Inspector Koch on the morning of the 17th, as well as Inge's clothing collected from the autopsy, and a hammer that was found in Inge's apartment. Most items, such as the tissues, clothing, duvet cover, etc., were tested for blood, hair, and semen. Because some swabs from the rape kit and the underwear reacted to brantamine, a chemical that is used to detect the presence of possible semen, further DNA tests were conducted on these items, and no male DNA was found. While it is known that brantamine can react with other substances, such as vaginal secretions, urine, ointments, bacterial infections, etc. And for each substance, the color reaction is different. Semen should produce a dark purple color in less than a minute. And the reaction that the laboratory staff observed was brown, not purple. And in their experience, this color change was more consistent with the presence of urine. And it is common that a body after death can release small amounts of urine. Here you can see the brantamine should react to the presence of semen over time. If it doesn't show this color change, then it's likely not semen. So all the hair collected at the crime scene and those that were found on the items that were collected, such as the duvet cover, etc., were put in a trichology docket for transfer to the Forensic Science Laboratory in Pretoria for further analysis. At this time, unfortunately, I'm not sure what happened with the docket and what the outcome of the analysis of the hair was. It's something I'm still looking into. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all for part 2. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this interesting. I look forward to bringing you part 3 very soon. Until then, stay tuned. Thank you.